This presentation is to talk about how to use the present subjunctive verb forms that you've been seeing in class in something called a noun clause. Our lesson is only going to concentrate on the present subjunctive mood, and we're only going to concentrate on its use in noun clauses. There are some other clauses that need subjunctive, but we'll get to those later, probably in Spanish 4. Okay, so using the present subjunctive mood. Well, take a look at these sentences and think for a moment about how they are different. Okay, so in the first, you can see obviously that the three sentences get just a little bit longer, a little bit more complicated as we go, and you probably are noticing in the third example already that we've got a verb that's in present subjunctive. So if I look at the first sentence, what is it that I want? Well, like everyone else, quiero dinero, pretty basic sentence with a subject, verb, and a direct object, something you could have worked with, back in Spanish 1. If I change it just a little bit to quiero ganar dinero, it's still something that you would have worked with in Spanish 1, the two verbs working together to show what it is I want. I want to earn money. But then when we switch to quiero que ella gane dinero, you'll see now in the third example, which is much longer, it's actually a complex sentence. There are two clauses in here. I want she earn money, with two separate subjects, I in the main clause, she in the secondary, and the appearance of subjunctive mood. So you have to be asking yourself, well, why would subjunctive mood appear? Because I've written long sentences before, and I haven't needed to use subjunctive mood. And that is absolutely true. Not every complex sentence requires you to use subjunctive mood. So the subjunctive mood decision must be driven by meaning. And you have to look closely at sentences now to determine whether or not that secondary clause is going to require you to use a subjunctive verb form. When we talk about these meanings, this meaning-driven structure, you're talking about sentences where the main clause contains, well, of course, there's going to be an acronym, a very specific expression. If the main clause contains an expression that tells what someone wishes or wants someone else to do, so a word that expresses wishing or wanting someone else to do something, you're going to be required to use subjunctive in that someone else to do something half of your sentence, okay, that secondary part. If the main part of your sentence contains an impersonal expression, and I'll show you some examples of those, then you are going to be required to use the subjunctive in that secondary clause. If the main part of your sentence expresses doubt, I forget that I'm writing in English, disbelief, or denial about what someone else is doing, then you're going to be required to use subjunctive. And finally, if the main clause contains an expression of emotion about what someone else is doing, you're going to be required to use subjunctive. Now remember, the subjunctive appears here in the secondary clause. So the secondary clause, that will, for us, always begin with que. It will always be introduced with the word que, and then a second person gets brought into the picture so that you are now imposing your will, or someone's imposing their will, or their thinking, or their disbelief, or their denial about what someone's doing. That's the idea behind using subjunctive mood. So in these following examples, here's a wishing or wanting example. Let's say we have something about what you desire. Now, if you simply desire to leave, you desire money or you desire more food, you do not need subjunctive. But if you desire that someone else do something, let's say that your mom, que tu mamá, prepares a good lunch, then you are now imposing your will, basically, over what you want your mom to do. You want your mom, prepare, using subjunctive, and then say un almuerzo, you know? And that deseas in the main clause, an expression of wishing or wanting, makes all the difference to what happens in the secondary clause. It determines it. The reason that subjunctive appears is because you have a change from you to mom. So you see the structure of the sentence. It's got to be two different people. And then some meaning in the beginning of the sentence that expresses your desire, your will, your wishing, your wanting about what someone else does. When we talked about impersonal expression being a reason for subjunctive, examples of impersonal expressions. Well, those are things that don't have subjects to them, but they are very expressive of emotion usually. Something like, oh, es fantástico, would require you to use subjunctive in the secondary clause. So if you wanted to make a comment about that mom's preparing lunch, you might say, es fantástico que tu mamá prepare. So it's the same exact, prepare almuerzo piece because of the impersonal expression that appears as the main clause of the sentence. So we can go on and use the that your mom prepares with different beginning clauses, but impersonal expression is a reason to use subjunctive. Notice the subjunctive clause. We said already subjunctive clauses start with que. So you're going to find que, and then the use of subjunctive appearing in that secondary clause because mama is introduced as a separate subject. Es is actually very impersonal, it translates as it's fantastic. So that's why it's called impersonal. The it is not a person. So anything that starts that way, es fabuloso, es importante, will require you to use subjunctive in a secondary clause that introduces another person. Okay, we said subjunctive would be used in doubt, disbelief, or denial sentences. So if I have something like, dudamos, we doubt. What are we doubting? That mom's going to prepare this lunch, okay? So, que mamá prepare, same idea. She's doing some preparing, but we are expressing our doubt about it in this case because, again, we are doubting what someone else does. You are finding the use of subjunctive in the secondary clause, which starts with que. So these have to be these complex sentences, okay, with very specific expressions in the first main clause. Expressions of wishing or wanting, expressions of impersonal expressions, expressions that show doubt, disbelief, or denial, and then finally on the next slide, expressions of emotion about what someone else is doing, always, okay, about what someone else is doing. If I didn't change subjects, I would not be needing subjunctive. There's plenty of ways to show emotion. We might talk about something we're scared about. Let's say I'm scared mom's preparing lunch. Maybe I don't like mom's lunch. So tengo miedo, I'm afraid. Tengo miedo de, what am I afraid of? In this case, que mamá prepare la comida or el almuerzo. So in this example, we are following what we said. We've got an expression of emotion. It is in the yo form. It's my emotion about what someone else, still mama in this case, is doing. And this secondary clause starts with que. Okay, so to start to sum it up, when we talk about using the subjunctive mood in sentences, we have a few conditions to meet. First of all, it has to be a complex sentence, okay? It has to be compound, which means that there's got to be two clauses in the sentence. If it's just a one-clause sentence, there's no subjunctive. The second condition is, and it really determines the use of subjunctive, is there an expression of wishing or wanting? Is there an impersonal expression? Is there an expression of doubt, disbelief, denial, or emotion about what someone else is doing. So that piece about what someone else is doing is critical. It can't be the same subject. It has to be about what someone else does. In those examples, it was always mama. Poor mama. Okay, and the third thing that we've said so far is that the noun clause that will contain subjunctive, for us, we're going to keep the noun clause second in our sentence, so we won't start with it. You could move it around, but we won't. And that noun clause begins with K. That's in 99% of sentences, and that's good enough for us. All right, so we're going to be looking for these really specific determining things, before we decide to use subjunctive. Compound sentence, two clauses, which are like mini sentences. They have their own subject and their own verb. Okay, one of these expressions. Now, this involves a lot of vocabulary and a lot of synonyms. There are lots of ways to express wanting, and there's a lot of ways to express doubt, and emotion. All right, and then our third condition is that the noun clause comes second and that it begins with K. So those are the three things that we're going to look for before we make our decision about, yes, I need to use subjunctive in that secondary clause. I hope this helps. Watch it a couple of times. It really is sort of simple. It really is just more driven by how much vocabulary do you remember and can you get those subjunctive verb forms right. We'll talk and practice a lot more with subjunctive mood when you get back to class mañana. Don't forget to fill in your note-taking sheet. Hasta luego. Ciao.